I'm Adam Bergman. I'm Managing Director of Ecotech Capital, which is an investment bank that works at the intersection of climate change and tech innovation. I've been working around food and ag tech for the last about 6 years now, really focusing throughout the full value chain. Initially, most of my time was on ag tech, what was happening on the farm, but I realized about 2 to 3 years ago that the adoption and innovation happening on the food tech side what was happening much quicker. I really put that much more to my history in clean tech, seeing most of the sector has been B2B, selling either to enterprises, utilities, farmers. And really the change with the food tech is it's a B2C product, and we've seen that with the rapid growth, whether it's Beyond Meat, Impossible Foods, or into the alternative dairy side with Oatly, Perfect Day, and some others. So I think you guys will be in for a really interesting session because we've got two excellent panelists, very different backgrounds, very different focuses in where they invest. And we'll start it off by, we've got Mia Medicus from Big Idea Ventures and Michiel van Deursen of Capital V. And with that, we're going to kick it off. As Martine mentioned, it'd be great if you guys could start looking at and answering the polls, because it'd be interesting to get people's views on alternative dairy. And we'll interject with questions. And if you have comments or questions, please throw them in the chat and we'll do our best to answer them. And with that, why don't we start off? Mia, why don't you just provide an overview of your background and a little bit on Big Idea Ventures?
Absolutely. Thanks, Adam. Hi, everyone. I'm Mia. I'm the program director for Big Idea Ventures New York office. Basically, what we do, we were founded in 2018. Since then, we've done nearly 30 deals in alternative protein. The majority of those have been through our accelerator model, which is the program that I run. What we do there is essentially we write a really small check into a pre-seed company. Then we take them through a 5-month program to really support them, help them scale. And from that group, those top performers we're looking to follow on with a larger investment when they raise subsequent rounds. So that's kind of the goal. We're kind of building a pool, we're supporting these companies, and just sort of, kind of hoping to facilitate some of the growth of this space.
Excellent. Michiel, please, let's give the same thing, a little bit on your background and on your company, and go into a little bit about really where you came from and how you got here. I think it'd be interesting for the listeners.
Thank you. Hi everybody. I started as an entrepreneur in the tech scene. Started a company, classified ads website years ago when the internet was coming up, and I wanted to be part of that. After a while, that became the biggest website in Belgium. I started out in Holland, actually, but things changed. You have to be agile, I think, as a startup. And I sold that to eBay in 2013. On the side, we also started a tech company, internet agency to pay to fund ourselves. That became an internet accelerator for tech startups. In 2014, I decided tech was a mature market and I need to do something else. So I sold that as well, and I started looking around. Started training for Ironman because I needed some focus on my health. And there I found out that food was very important. It's the fourth sport, right? Swim, bike, run, and eat. So I found out what food does to your body and to the world. And I thought, this is the new internet. I'm going to be part of this. So I contacted a company, a startup in Holland that I really liked what they were doing, small, tiny company, the Vegetarian Butcher, and started investing in them and helping them out, and saw the whole experience, the whole growth of the alternative protein market from up close as an investor this time. We sold that to Unilever 2 years ago already. And since then, I started my own company or fund to invest in vegan startups, help with my knowledge and my experience and with my network. I invest in everything that is vegan, which means that remove animals from production. So that can be also dairy, food, but also leather, for example. things like that.
Excellent. That's great. So let's jump into some questions. So Mia, what do you think is driving the rapid adoption of the alternative dairy sector?
That's a really interesting question. I think it's a few things, and I think depending on the consumer, the motivation can be different. I think for a large and growing consumer group, a lot of it is actually environmental concerns. That's been part of the takeoff of, I think, oat milk and oat-based dairy products, where you're also avoiding almonds and nuts and products that don't have the same sustainability concerns as animal products, but do have more than something like oats. I think for other consumers, part of it is health too. I think there's growing awareness around just negative health impacts of consuming too much dairy. And then honestly, I think part of it is just kind of like excitement. And now there are really, products that aren't just like, a fine alternative to milk, but actually really taste good as their own type of product. So I think it's a few things.
No, and I think it's a really interesting points that you put up there. So Michael, I'll ask you from two perspectives. So one, you've been investing in here, but two, you said you went to a vegan lifestyle as well. One of the people who's been a big investor in this sector, Chris Kerr, said to me previously on a panel that he really got into investing because he saw in his family he was likely to start going vegan, because I think at the time his fiance or wife was vegan, and he said, I just thought all the food sucked. And at that point, I realized I needed to make investments to get it better. Do you have a similar view, or what really, from that perspective, have you taken away, one, becoming vegan and then starting to invest in the sector, about where it is and where it needs to go?
Yeah, it's totally true. When I started to become vegan, I had the same journey as Mia just said. I think consumers are better informed right now. There's so much more information about what's happening. You can track your food better. So I had that as well. So I thought I need to become vegan. And then I tried the food, and like the burgers, they tasted like cardboard. And it was not a good experience. And then I thought this should be better, Technology is there, we can do it. And that's why I started investing and exploring what was out there.
And I think your point is really important. A lot of people don't fully grasp the innovation that someone like Beyond Meat and Impossible did, and taking their product and bringing it next to the meat at the grocery store is game changing. If one thinks back to what alternative protein on the meat side was previously, they were these really scary garden burgers that were in the frozen section that even vegans and everyone else dreaded. Like no one wanted to go and eat those. And now we've actually fundamentally changed how people look at it. When you guys think about the dairy side, or the alternative dairy side, how do you think about that market as well? Have you seen similar kind of game-changing changes to how it's displayed and how it's used as we've seen in the meat side? I don't know, Michael, if you want to start there.
Yeah, I think the most interesting thing what happened is that before, the products were all catering to the vegan and vegetarian consumer, which was like 1 or 2% of the market.
Yep.
And Beyond Meat and Vegetarian Butcher made the switch and have the meat eater as the main consumer. And the most important thing is taste. So taste has to be important. It has to be the same or better than the animal product. Yeah. And I think that happened with meat, and that happened really well. Dairy is a little bit different because it has always been there and it tastes different. And what we see now is some kind of extra run to also make it better or the same as the original products. But there are also a lot of products already, and oat milk tastes different than cow milk. Everybody knows that, but people are also used to that now. So but there are a lot of companies that also try to mimic and create cow milk experience.
And I was going to say, Mia, so when we look at these markets, how do you think about investing in alternative dairy, and how is it different than, say, the alternative meat market when you're looking to invest? What do you think are kind of the similarities and differences?
I think there are a lot of similarities. You mentioned earlier, alternative dairy actually has a larger share of the overall dairy market than alternative meat right now. So I would say in that sense, it's actually a little bit more mature, but I think it's still a really young and growing market. Some of the differences kind of lie in, I think there's a little bit more room in like a flexitarian diet. Some of the first changes that you might see might be actually some meat products, but I think there are a few dairy things that are like easy switches. Milk is one of them. But then there are some kind of key pieces like, I think cheese is a big one, butter, that people really think of as like, if you're eating a non-dairy cheese right now, I think you're more likely eating a plant-based diet. Versus if you're eating a Beyond Burger or drinking, oat milk or almond milk right now, it's entirely possible and likely that you would have a really still diverse diet. So I think I veered a little bit from the question, but there are categories within this space that still have a lot of growth. I think the growth of the milk section of that category has made it look like a more mature market than it maybe is.
No, and I think it's a really fair point. And I always laugh because I've been to a number of alternative dairy players who give me ice cream, and it tastes great, but the one thing they all have in common is it's always chocolate ice cream. And I kind of say to them, look, your ice cream's great, but show me like a vanilla ice cream. Show me something that chocolate's not going to mask, because you can put chocolate on pretty much any product and you could really get the taste you want. So just kind of playing on that theme, as we look out there in some of these products, clearly the milk side has got ahead. It looks like the cream side, or the milk cream side, and Oatly's done a good job of that. To your question, how about cheese and butter? How far off do you think we are from that? Is it just a taste thing? Is it people just needing to get comfortable that it's not coming from a cow? And I asked this question in the context of something we discussed when we were kind of preparing, which is, you could argue that what Beyond and Impossible have been able to achieve, a lot of it has been done because of the huge marketing support they got from Burger King for the Impossible Whopper and from Dunkin' for the Beyond Breakfast Sausage, amongst others. You really probably aren't going to get that similar type of marketing help from partners here. What kind of drives butter? What drives cheese? What drives some of these other products?
Yeah, well, I think so. In terms of how far off we are, for butter, there are actually some really good alternatives right now. I think that's kind of just a matter of taking time to grow, and some of the pieces that you mentioned that I'll get to. For cheese, I think it's more of like, that's more on the technology side, where right now the plant-based cheeses just cannot meet, they can't match what dairy cheese is. There are some actually really great alternatives. We have a company in our portfolio that's making pretty much the closest thing to like premium dairy cheeses I've ever tasted. But I do think that's going to come more from, the cell-based developments and fermentation. And there have been some developments there. So I think we're really close. And then in terms of the marketing piece, I think that like actually the path that Beyond and Impossible have taken, that lends a hand to any alternative protein product, even dairy, less of a hand than it does to meat. But yeah, there won't be that same, butter is kind of like an incognito ingredient in something. And so an alternative butter company doing B2B won't have that same marketing play. So that is a challenge that they'll face.
Okay. And I would say, I might be wrong, but Michiel, sitting where you do right near France, and I know how some of the other countries around there think about their cheese. Do you have a similar view? Do you think we're getting closer on the plant cellular, or mostly today plant-based cheese side, to have the French be willing to eat it? Are we getting to that?
Yeah, that's true. I'm in Barcelona at the moment, and there are it's super close to France. There are some amazing cheese products already available, but they're all not scalable, and that's the problem as well. There needs to be a lot more manufacturing in place and research how to scale up the artisan things. And I think fermentation will do a lot in that space.
And to that point, how are you approaching alternative dairy, looking at both plant and the cell-based? Do you put them in similar categories? Do you think they're different? Do you think long-term they'll be competing against each other on alternative dairy? What's your take on those two different areas?
Well, I think dairy is very diverse. There are a lot of different, you have eggs, you have cheese, you have milk, there are so many different things. Well, probably also meat has those, but I think there are different things, to be honest.
And are you looking at, when you're looking at an investment and it's a plant-based cheese or plant-based butter versus a cell-based, are you looking at them just to say, look, they're both going into the same end market, so let's compare how the two are going to be? Or do you look at cell-based and plant-based differently at this point?
I look at cell-based and plant-based differently, because plant-based is closer to market to get into the shelves than cell-based. Cell-based is a bit more further away. It's very capital intensive. Scaling up needs to be done. So it's not the commodity that is plant-based already yet.
We talked for a moment on this when we got on. Do you have any takeaway from what Singapore did in approving that cell-based meat today? Does that give you a lot more confidence that stuff is going to happen quicker, or is that just Singapore, where I could see places like Singapore and Israel at the forefront, and then everyone else waiting a long time? But do you take that as a big step for this sector, and how do you feel it's going to have an impact on the alt dairy side?
I think it's amazing. It's a big win. Singapore did that today, and they are really in front of others. And I think governments are like that. They look at other governments, what are they doing, and one has to start. So this could be the start of a whole new trend, where before they were thinking novel foods, how will they react? Let's be scared, Yep. But now I think the gates have been opened. Very nice.
Okay, no, that's great. And so Mia, when we're thinking about alternative dairy, what do you think the biggest challenges are for the sector today, whether in just generally and as you look at it from the investor perspective, and how do you think about plant and cell-based as well? Do you think the challenges are different there?
I think they're actually pretty similar challenges. The biggest challenge that I see is the regulatory piece. I think, the approval of the first cell-based meat in Singapore is a great step. We kind of, it was an anticipated step, but it's really exciting to see it happening right now. I think the US will follow that path, but on a slower timeline. And I think for dairy, so for plant-based, it's a similar challenge, but I think it's a little bit smaller. Because it's already on the market, and just the word like plant-based, plants are something that are already really familiar. So even though, there are some labeling kind of issues and challenges around, can you use the term butter if you're calling it plant-based butter, for example? Can you package it to look similar? These kind of representation things. For cell-based, there's a whole other question of, I can imagine like the term GMO being thrown around a lot, and I think there's actually a lack of consumer understanding of what that really means. And understanding it and being aware is important to understand what you're eating, but when it's applied to a lot of different things without like an explanation, it can kind of just be to like create fear or create a reservation. So I think the cell-based side definitely faces a bigger challenge in building consumer trust, making sure that consumer education is done properly from the start before it's kind of too late, and a lot of this labeling maybe turns a lot of people off.
Okay. No, I think that's good. And it's funny, as you were talking, I was just checking in the chat, and they talked about, one of the poll questions was, what type of alternative dairy products are you using, or would you be interested to use? And interestingly, by far, not by far, a little bit above the top number was cheese. So it's interesting that it sounds like there's a lot of work still to be done on the cheese side, with milk being in second place. And then interestingly, I'm surprised that ice cream is so far back, just thinking about how many people are lactose intolerant. I would have thought that ice cream, if nothing else, would have been much further up. But it's interesting just to get those perspectives as well. So let's jump into things about investing. So Michiel, you're investing in the sector, no doubt about it. We're in the midst of COVID. vaccines are coming, but we're still there, and I think most of us expect us to be there for some time. How's COVID impacted your investment strategy? And when the world comes back to whatever normal is, what do you think? How are you thinking about investing in the future as well?
It's interesting. It has changed a little bit. When COVID started, I thought everything was going to change. Yep. And then it kind of didn't. And there was a lot of money coming into the market because of government financial. They just put a lot of money in the market. And what I see now is there's a more level playing field. Before COVID, I had to travel everywhere. I was flying everywhere daily. And now I can just sit in my office, speak to everybody. So that's different. That's nice. It's even nicer. And I think in a post-COVID field time, people have learned a lot about food, about health, about I think there are more investors, more startups now, more consumers. So that will change. For me, it doesn't actually change a lot as an investor to invest in, but I'm happy to welcome all the other new investors in the space.
So Mia, you've been in the sector a long time as well, and I know Big Idea and Andrew have been doing this for many years. How do you think about where the market is today? Do you have any concerns either that there's so much capital coming in, valuations maybe are getting ahead of themselves? Having been in a number of clean tech sectors myself, whether it was solar or EVs or some others where valuations got ahead of themselves and there were bubbles and there were some negative implications, what are you thinking about as you're investing, and do you have concerns of where the sector might be going from an interesting capital level perspective?
So, I mean, I think anytime that a sector gets like a lot of buzz and a lot of new dollars coming in just because of new interest, that's a bubble essentially. So I do think there's a bubble. It doesn't really give me like a lot of concern for the future. I think like the vision of this kind of sector moving forward and growing, I buy into that. I believe that. So if there's, a little bubble right now because this excitement is kind of just starting to happen, in the long term, I don't see it being like a big burst. Maybe things are just slightly overvalued right now.
Okay. And when you think about the sector, we've seen some really big raises from some alternative dairy companies in the past year, whether it's Califia, Oatly, in the past Ripple's done it, who have a fair amount of capital right now. Do you think that companies with big balance sheets like them have a major competitive advantage over a lot of the new entrants? And as you're investing into these new entrants, how do you get comfortable that they're going to need to raise similar amounts of money and scale?
So it's a few things. I think like it really depends on the timeline that you're looking at. So if you were asking me like today, do I think that these like companies that have raised these larger rounds that have more traction, do they have an advantage? And they do, just because of like their stage right now compared to companies that are just starting out. But they at one point were in the same stage as these companies that are just starting out. And so, in the immediate term, yes, there's an advantage the more traction a company has, but that doesn't prevent new companies from kind of growing. And the other thing that, it's part of our investment thesis and just part of the way that I look at the space, at least, is if you look at, the animal-based dairy shelves of a grocery store, there are a number of different brands selling really similar products. They all, or for the most part, come from cows, at least in the US. There's like different fat, whether it's organic, things like that, but essentially very similar product. In the plant-based space, there's actually more variety. And so I think there's room for that number of brands plus some, because there are different plants, et cetera, different formulations that you can use.
Yep. No,
yeah, that's absolutely true. I think we are used from tech that Amazon, Facebook, Google, that winner takes all. But I think in food it's different. There's room for many more brands. People like choice, and everybody eats at least 3 times a day. So I think there's room for everybody.
So Michiel, from that perspective, we think about the alternative meat area, and we've seen Beyond and Impossible really get strong, but you also have Cargill, JBS, Maple Leaf Foods, Purdue, Tyson all coming out with products. The dairy side is interesting because you haven't seen the equivalent from the dairies coming out with alternative protein products. Could be because most of the dairies are struggling to survive and bankruptcies keep going. But do you see potentially CPG beverage companies and others really coming out with meaningful products in the alternative dairy side at scale to compete against the Oatleys and Ripples and the next generation in the sector?
I think they are trying. I see Danone, they have bought Alpro, which is a big dairy brand. You have Bell Group, they just bought Nature and Moi or something. So they are starting, and I hear from a lot of dairy companies that are looking into the space now. I think before they thought it was never going to happen, what happened with meat, but their eyes are now open. So I expect a lot of interesting activity in the market.
And I would expect that as well. I think you've got one milk cooperative up in Canada that has, I think its best owned is now out there with an alternative dairy, and I would assume Land O'Lakes, I can't say I've seen anything, but I would assume Land O'Lakes, which has a big ag piece as well, which could be growing some of the plant-based products that they'll likely get in. But it will, to me, that's an interesting question to see how this plays out. So I think we're coming to the end. I guess what I just leave this with and open it to each of you is where do you see this sector in 5 years? Again, I've seen data that shows alternative dairy could be in the US 13, 14% of the market. I've seen statistics that say generationally, if you go to Gen Z and millennials, maybe it's 25 to 30%. Where do you guys see this market 5, 10 years out? And is when we're sitting 50 years back reflecting on our lives, will we be able to get a glass of cow milk, or will there be none on the market anymore?
Yeah, shall I answer? Shall I start?
Sure.
I think it will be. The cow milk in 50 years or so will be a very rare occasion. Like people who smoke a cigar now or something, you don't do that every day. I think in a few years' time it will grow immensely, the sector, the space, because people are more and more aware of the health benefits. Climate, of course, has to change. Governments will step in there. People are better informed. Animal welfare, of course. I think all these factors, you see it in the new generations already. They are more and more using these alternative products. It's amazing.
Okay, and Mia?
I agree. I'm if you're a fan of this space, you would call it optimistic. So I'm equally optimistic. I think in the next 5 years, I see, alternative dairy taking at least 30% market share, if not more. And I think it kind of happens exponentially as we become more comfortable with some of these options. The questions around, is it as healthy? Is it too processed? Things like that just start to kind of fade away. So it's going to become not just a larger portion of the market, but also more normal. I think we'll stop wondering if milk can be used referring to anything other than cow's milk, things like that. So I kind of just see it becoming the new sector, if that makes sense.
Yep, excellent. Well, I'm sorry to say our time's done because this has been very interesting. Would love to continue, but if you could join me in thanking Mia and Michiel for a really interesting session on alternative dairy. And guys, again, appreciate your insight. It was really helpful, and I think it gave the viewers a great perspective on where the sector's going from an investment and a consumer trend side. So thanks again, and hopefully everyone enjoyed the session.
Thank you, Adam.
Thank you.
Okay, take care. Bye.